We continue our exclusive interview with former New York Giants assistant coach Pratik Patel as we seek answers regarding the team's injury bug situation. What suggestions does he have for the team if he were still on the coaching staff? You'll find out coming up next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Traina, P-Train. And I want to send a shout out to all my everydayers, my newcomers, and everybody in between, including my Blue Crew members. You are all appreciated, all loved. Thank you so much for following, making us your first listen of the day, or if you watch on YouTube, your first watch of the day. And on today's program, we're going to continue with our exclusive interview with Pratik Patel, who, of course, was a Giants assistant coach. He was the lead nutritionist, so he worked with the strength and conditioning coach Aaron Wellman at the time, familiar with how the Giants were set up. And we talked a little bit more about how the Giants could potentially practice, what they could potentially do to solve some of the injury problems that they're having. Some really good stuff in this part of the interview. So let's not waste any time. Let's get right into it. You mentioned that sometimes volume can, excess practice volume can lead to these injuries. What about the flip side of that? Not enough volume. Can that lead to injury?
Yeah, because if you don't do enough in practice, when you get thrown to the fire in a game, it's just a whole different ballgame. Not only is that volume high for the players who want to play the full game, and you don't know how many snaps it's going to be. I mean, it could be as minimal as like 45, and it can go as high as over 100. I remember in 19, it was Julian Love. I think it was his first start at safety. We played at Philly in the back half of the year. So, I mean, our season was done, unfortunately. He played 70 plus snaps in one half. I mean, he played a game's worth of snaps and a half. I think he ended up with well over 100. And after the game, and somebody told me that, I'm like, oh, I got to go talk to Julian right now because he's going to be hurting. It's an interesting thing. And I don't know if you guys have seen the video from training camp last year, Dan Campbell, who I'm a big fan of. I was wrong about him. So my initial judgment about him was wrong just from that first presser he had. He had a great speech to his team. He said, guys, if we could just go through the bare minimum and practice and get out of it, and if that was good enough to get you ready to play a game, to go through the season, then I would do it because I know that would make sure that you reduce the risk of injury. But he's like, training at a high intensity with appropriate workloads in volume and density throughout the entire course of the year is the best way to mitigate injuries. And this comes from, they have accumulated this data in college, it's football, it's, international soccer, where there's, again, a lot of money going on. So they want to make sure that they're monitoring their athletes too. So when you do too little, you do your players a disservice, especially when you're heading through training camp and they don't get a lot of snaps in preseason and you throw them to the fire. I remember talking with Pio, who I think was a fan favorite of a lot of people, who's one of my favorite athletes that I work with. Guy was practice squad jumping around. All of a sudden he's starting center and played, started for 3 years or so. We would, reduce the volume. And again, this is a coach's decision. So, they pick and choose how many series that the starters who are going to play week one get. And, it's not a lot. And most of the starters aren't playing that fourth preseason game back when it was 4. That was the guys who were trying to, the fringe guys trying to make the team. And I'm like, talking to him, I'm like, obviously, mentally you're ready, the game plan, scheme and all that. I'm like, physically, are you ready for this? He's like, it's going to hurt. And I remember talking to him after that Dallas game. Obviously, we lost that game. And he's like, I just feel like I've been run over by a car. And in the first games, especially if you go from not doing a lot to doing a lot, really resonate quite a bit. And luckily we had enough density and volume, manipulated throughout training camp to make sure that at least they could handle that demand without having them experience it early enough. But it is a big deal when you under recover too much, then there isn't a chance to actually do what's needed to be done.
Hey, Giant fans, score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 MONEYLINE bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is super easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and much more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and score big this NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Hey, Giant fans, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you all day, every day, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. So, when you, just to be clear, when you talk about under or not getting enough work, you're talking about at a game speed, because obviously, no matter how many reps you get in practice, you can't simulate the conditions in a game. You're not hitting, you're not getting brought to the ground and all that stuff. So, am I understanding you correctly there?
Yeah, I think it's a fine line because, again, you have a limited amount of time in pads. So you want to make sure it's effective, and there's a lot of teaching and there's a lot of understanding of why are we going in pads, what's it like to make sure that, your technique is good, you're wrapping up, you're tackling properly. If you're a ball carrier, how you're going to get hit. So the first time you get hit isn't a shock where the ball just splits out of your hands. There's a lot of benefit to it, but you don't want to spend all your time in pads just because it's just going to wear down players that are older. They're mid-30s, they're high 30s. They've gone through so much. Their bodies have been through the ringer playing a very violent sport. That's why you have a lot of these vet days just because they need them. So it's up to the coach and everybody within the performance and health staff to just make sure that there's an understanding of like what's the appropriate amount of volume and density and where should the intensity be for specific practices. The coaches are going to put together the game plan and the focus of the practice, what those periods look like. But I think knowing that in advance is really important from a preparation standpoint, because we're the ones that have our hands and access to the players more than anybody else, especially me. I think I spent more time with the players than anybody else because I was in the locker room, in the training room, I was in the weight room, I was training them, was starting the conditioning sessions, and I was on the field running around, checking with my head cut off, making sure that the guys are hydrating, eating, making sure that they were mitigating fatigue as much as possible. So it's tough, but I think when everybody has a better understanding of it, it can make for taking care of the players and training them the way that needs to be trained so they are ready. So, the Dan Campbell way to say, if I didn't train you hard at certain times or at this intensity level, I would be doing you a disservice because it wouldn't prepare you for the demands of what the season's going to bring.
Pratik, Ronnie Barnes is very well respected. I know you respect him. I respect him. He's been at this a long time. I think he's in, I want to say the North or the South Carolina Hall of Fame for sports medicine. I forget which one it is. But that being said, a lot of fans question him and if he's with the times and, does he need to go, or, they blame him for creating the injuries. When I sit there and I say, no, that he treats the injuries, or his staff treats the injuries. Can you just set the record straight regarding Ronnie's role in this whole process? I know he is like the head honcho. He is the VP of medical services there. But, in terms of, what his role, his exact role is, the influence he might have had on the staff when you were there versus, what it might be now. Just can you set the record straight for the people out there?
Yeah. Everybody wants an answer to why problems always arise. And when you have a common denominator, it's easy to say, well, that's the person. Like, the training staff isn't there to physically prepare the athletes for the demands of practice. That was on us from a strength conditioning standpoint, from a nutrition standpoint, like working together with the coaches. Like, it blows my mind when people point the finger at athletic trainers because it doesn't make any sense to me. Like, there hasn't been any athletic trainer, even somebody that has as much influence and experience as someone like Ronnie, that I would say, well, he's the reason why injuries are happening. A lot of the things I've already kind of talked about, why injuries do happen, a lot of it you have to put on the onus on the players too. The funny thing is Tom Brady just had a really funny riff a couple days ago or yesterday saying like the quality of football isn't any good. It's gone downhill, coaching's gone downhill. That's the truth of the matter. Like just because somebody works in the professional setting as a coach or a player doesn't mean they're actually that good. They just happen to get there. I don't know how Ronnie's role has changed since I was there, because obviously my last month there was August of 2020. So it's been a few years. So, maybe he's taken more of an administrative role. They've hired, more people on staff. It's kind of grown. They replaced my position. They hired a new head strength coach. They've had different assistant strength coaches come through. So when I was there, from a medical perspective, and you learn a lot from just observing and working, but you also learn a lot by talking, mainly with the players, because the players are going to be very open and honest with you, especially coming from places where they hadn't been treated very well, or they felt that they had been done a disservice. Like Ronnie and his staff bent over backwards for a lot of the players. Like the relationship with HSS, one of the best hospital systems in the world, like the docs would be there nonstop. If something was going on, they would get carted and shuttled into the city just to make sure that they were seen. And you have access to some of the best docs in the world. And then you also see the NFLPA evaluations. Like the players are very honest. Like they rated the staff very highly, and then they rated the staff, like other players that were on other teams were very honest about strength and conditioning staffs, the nutrition resources they got, the medical staffs. Like, look, they'll tell you when something's wrong, and it's anonymous, so they can be completely transparent about it. So again, and my working relationship with him was, he was very supportive of what I wanted to do and was able to do. It's to an extent. It's not like I could just start feeling like I can run the roost just because I was given a long leash and had a lot of autonomy to kind of run around the building and try to do what I thought was right for the players within my scope of practice. But again, the athletic trainers and the medical staff, they want to do as many things prophylactically. So the evaluations that we would do would be pretty extensive. They'd spend a lot of time at the combine and the Senior Bowl, making sure that we're getting players that didn't have serious flags or injury concerns. Every free agent that came in had a comprehensive workup. We'd be in constant communication with the medical staff if something definitely flagged. Not like it was perfect. There's always room for continual growth and improvement with these channels. But you can't put it all on his staff. Like I took it upon myself to make sure that I was in meetings and I was conversing with his staff members too, because you have 70 guys coming all at once to try to get taped in treatment and talk to the trainers, when you don't have 70 athletic trainers and doctors and, nutritionists and strength coaches. So it's a chaotic environment, and, we did the best that we could, but he puts the athlete's best interest in their care very high. And I saw that firsthand. And, the proof is in the pudding with what we were able to execute with, Aaron and myself and Ronnie, our staffs together, just those years from 16 to 19, the games lost due to injury. That's what you have to look at. You don't look at injuries because in the NFL, you have to report every injury, regardless if it's an actual injury or so-and-so had a root canal or so-and-so woke up stretching and extended their neck and is now sore. So yeah, they can't practice for today, because weird stuff happens all the time.
Right. In terms of, the Giants and the continued injury problems they have, I know, again, you're looking now from the outside, but based on what you can gather and what what can this team do better, do you think, to maybe cut down on some of these soft tissue injuries? Again, the contact ones are going to happen,
Yeah.
but the soft tissue ones, what can they do, short of, locking all these players up in a room and telling them, okay, guys, you're going to eat at this time, you're going to sleep for X number of hours, you're going to hydrate. What changes would you say could maybe be made to hopefully get them back on the right track injury wise?
It's hard to say. I don't want to say they should do what we did, because, football has changed. The NFL has changed since we were there in just a span of 3 years, I think, without knowing exactly hey, what kind of training programming is going, what kind of periodization, because it's another new head coach. So I don't know exactly his thought process with how he structures practice. And again, it's a very unique situation with the head coach and the head athletic trainer, because the head coach wants something one way, the GM wants something one way, and you always kind of have to default to that person because they're in charge. It all goes back to, again, my philosophy and what I do with the people I work with, whether it's an athlete or non-athlete. It's, you have to take an inside out approach, and you have to kind of overturn as many stones as you can. You can't leave a stone left unturned, because there could be something that's just blatantly there that nobody had really ever thought of to look at or assess or test. And again, no speculation. I think it's just being very intentional about how they practice, how they prepare the athletes, what the athletes are doing, so holding them accountable to an extent. How they do evaluations, again, because I know they've changed a lot of people in the scouting and personnel department, the things that they're doing to test athletes, the free agents, the combine players. And if something flags, okay, that communication has to be sent to everybody else that's in charge of the athlete care from a performance, strength, conditioning, nutrition standpoint. Just asking the players, like, open communication, just very much letting them have a say in things, because nobody knows their bodies better than them. And they know when something's off, when something's wrong. Again, being able to support them in that regard, coming up with the resources that are going to help them, not just abiding by just very basic, like, hey, we're only going to provide these meals, these supplements, and do these tests if it's within what the CBA allows. Because again, NFL organizations have money. Don't get me wrong. There's more than enough money to go around. And just putting as much emphasis on that and trying to be as proactive, and then having a plan in place when things don't necessarily go right, and just being very adaptable and adjustable.
Hey, Giant fans, if you want to secure tickets to your favorite concerts, shows, and sporting events without the stress, you need to check out Game Time, the fast and easy way to buy tickets right up until the day of the event. With amazing deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun that you're going to have. With Game Time, you not only get the lowest prices, you also get clear images of seat views and event cancellation protection. And if you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So go ahead and snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase at Game Time. And then I have to ask you this question because I happened to see it in an article or a survey that The Athletic did. One of the questions they asked anonymous players is their feelings about turf and the role that it plays in injuries. I'd like to get you to weigh in on that. Is that overblown, or is there something to it regarding the different types of turf, regarding turf versus grass, or what?
Yeah, I think anytime you change playing surfaces and you have multiple surfaces that you practice and compete on, that is going to influence the way that the body works. So in terms of how the players feel, it's definitely going to be different surface to surface. Now, do we point the finger and just say, like, hey, the turf is the reason why all the injuries happen? I'd say no. I'd say there's a lot of things that come in play that are massive that should be looked at and addressed, that are controllable, that sometimes get overlooked because the players don't want to do it. The players don't want to practice a certain way. They don't want to be in the building for X number of hours. They don't want to do these recovery modalities and assessments and tests and take care of themselves. They want, again, it's the minimum amount of effort for maximum amount of ability to play and money. So it's easy, again, to point the finger at turf. There are college teams that practice day in and day out on turf and compete on turf, and the injury number isn't significantly higher versus those that are on grass. So in terms of when you do practice and compete on different surfaces, yeah, the players will feel differently. Now, is it the cause of injury? I'd say playing football is the cause of injury, and bad habits and bad preparation is more of the cause of injury than just blaming everything on a playing surface. Because we've just seen 3 high-profile quarterbacks this year get injured, and they all 3 of them were on grass. If I remember correctly, Kirk's was on grass, Daniels was on grass, and there's somebody else that I'm blanking right now, and it was on grass. So it's like, okay, well, why is everybody not pointing the finger at grass?
So could that be all right? So let's take the Giants, for example. They practice during the week on grass. Grass is a little different surface, obviously, than the turf. So, in your opinion, does it make more sense that if you're playing on artificial turf that weekend, maybe you move your practice indoors and you practice in the field house where you have artificial turf so that the bodies can get used to, the give of the turf, the feel and the pounding versus, practicing on grass all the time?
And that's a good question. That was something that I thought about, not insanely extensively, but I was thinking, like, should I bring this up and should we have this conversation about, at least mimicking as much as you can what you do during the week for game day. But the players themselves know that when they're in the field house practicing on the turf, it affects them more, whether that's, we haven't taken like objectionable quantified data. It's just in their heads, like, hey, my knees hurt more, my ankle hurts more. I feel a little bit more beat up when we practice on turf. Sometimes you're just forced to because of what the weather's like in the Northeast. But it's hard. I think sometimes, the body should have at least some exposure to what you're going to do. So, MetLife's turf, the indoor turf field is turf. Should one of those practices on one of the, maybe higher intensity days, or is it the higher volume days makes the most sense? But you also have to look at it from a psychological perspective. Are you going to get quality outputs from the players if you tell them that, hey, we're actually going to be moving inside on turf, and they're going to groan and they're going to moan, and that psychological aspect can definitely impact the way that they physically perform too. So it's not an easy question to answer. I think, more people and the players too coming into a room and actually having that conversation to say, like, what's the most appropriate or intelligent practice structure in terms of surface, in terms of prepping the players to get ready for game day, whether it's, home or away, grass or turf, indoor, outdoor, hot, cold, rain, snow, whatever it is. I don't have that definite answer, but that is a good question. It is something that I had thought of.
What about staggering the practice time? So, to allow for the most recovery time in between. So if you're practicing, say on Wednesday, the Giants practice 12:15. I think they start 12:15, actually 12:30. And then they do it Wednesday, 12:30. Then the next day, Thursday, 12:30. Then the next day, they move it up a little bit because I think they lay off. Can that maybe help?
It potentially could. So if you give enough recovery time in between, like, your most dense practice, and then when you start up again by, having the players do something, exerting a good amount of physical stress, if they comply. Now you can change practice times, say, hey, we're doing this for you. We want you guys to make sure that, just get enough sleep, do your recovery modalities, which are individualized based on what a player needs. Make sure you're hydrating, you're eating really well, you're supplementing properly. But, that's the catch-22. You can have all the good intentions in the world, but it doesn't mean anything unless the players comply and execute it. So you might have a small group of the players that end up buying in, your Daniels and Saquons, whoever, but then you have a lot of the other ones that are just like, hey, whatever, I'm not going to keep doing me. Coach changed practice time, and, I don't think it's a big deal. So I'm just going to continue doing what I've always done. And again, sometimes it's good to just lay things out and just stick with it if it seems to be working, and not try to get too smart and say, like, oh, we have to change practice time every single day. And, we're going to be traveling over here, so we have to go to this location, 7 days early. Like, I just had randomly read something about the Germany game where Miami played Kansas City. Miami went well in advance. Kansas City's like, yeah, we're going to go a day or two and just, chill for a day, practice, and then play. And then Kansas City, dominates that game. And when Miami had been very articulate and meticulous about, we're going to get there super early, we're going to adjust for, 2 days, then we're going to practice there for a few days and then get ready. So, and again, it's difficult because nobody has the one right answer that's going to fit every team's problem or situation. You have to be very cognizant of what's going on in the building with that team at that time.
It's a very fascinating topic. It's one that nobody seems to have the answer to, although there are teams in the league that don't seem to have problems with injuries. And I know a lot of Giant fans always say to me, oh, can we trade for, the Jacksonville staff, for example, a team that's relatively healthy, or this staff, a team that's relatively healthy? Final question for you, Pratik. I know you study all this stuff. Do you see any discernible differences based on, again, your time in the NFL and what you've studied and what your research, that what maybe these healthier teams are doing differently than what maybe the Giants have been doing?
I think what it comes down to is just having the appropriate staff members that are in charge of their particular area, making sure that they are really good at what they do. There's a lot of open communication and understanding with, what needs to be done, and a belief and understanding, most importantly, from the GM and the head coach about just the structure of how everything works. Because there are teams that invest really well. They've got a good amount of resources. There are others that don't. You hear about it from players that, have bounced around from either team to team, or they go from one team and then they sign a big free agent deal and go to another team, knowing that they want the money, but the resources provided for them are going to be very lacking. I just think it's how they approach all of it. When you have the right people at the right time in the right places, and those people are just very open-minded, they're not egotistical or narcissistic. They know what the main cause is, and more importantly, they can get buy-in from the players. That's the biggest thing, honestly, of when the players are around you, and again, you have a finite amount of time with them. A lot of players have their own people. I actually just had a conversation. A guy reached out to me. He travels with two high profile players on an NFL team and does specific things for them. So he was in a hotel room, and we're talking. It's like, yeah, well, if the resources aren't good enough within the facility, then players are just going to farm that out, because they know that they can find somebody that they can trust who's going to be able to work for them and be effective. So I think there's nothing wrong with that, because ultimately that's the player's decision, because they're paying the money for it. But again, I think really, really good strength and conditioning staffs with nutrition and supplementation to complement it, doing the right assessments and tests, and utilizing that information to actually inform decision-making, to educate the players, to provide the resources, to, try to hold them accountable, to get them to want to buy in. I think that's the biggest thing that I've seen from teams that seem to have a lot of success versus those that don't. And when you have a head coach that believes in it and can take that information and actually, utilize it and help support the players and the staffs too, I think that becomes a very, very strong positive thing